April 26th, 1937, the small town of Guernica, home of the resistance against the nationalist government in Spain, was bombed for 2 straight hours by the German Condor Legion, all to test new weapons. Over 200 civilians were killed. In response, Pablo Picasso, stationed in France at the time, decided he needed to do something. So he created the piece simply known as Guernica. Guernica perfectly encaptures the horrors of war and the atrocities committed against civilians. My goal was to find the answers to these questions. What is art? What does art do, not only for the artist, but the individual and the society? In searching for the answers to these questions, I interviewed 3 artists, all of whom are educators.
To determine what art contributes to us, we first need to know how to identify what art is. This is where the first question comes in. What is art? Coming in, I was looking for an exact definition, something precise. What I got in the end was something else.
Someone were to ask you, such as me, how do you define art? Can we see a lot of things? Do you factor in skill, intention, effort, or like different forms? Like I read an article just the other day talking about someone who, or not the other day, but a while back, someone who made a portrait out of spit. So, like, how do you define art?
How do I find art? I'm really open about what art is, and this is why I'm sort of struggling. When you're in art school, what is art is what all incoming freshmen talk about constantly, you know. And the longer they're there, the less and less they talk about that. And over my career, to me, I don't know what art is. I know what I do, and it sort of falls in that category. You said a few things that in your question that, yeah, those all sound reasonable. That's art. I am totally open to what art is, or almost totally. You know, if the thing of portrait out of spit, I'm there. I'll do that. You know, David Hammond's very famous New York African-American artist, used to, in the winter, he would set up a little stand in New York City, and he'd sell snowballs for $1 a piece in the snowstorm. He had this table, and he'd sell them for $1 a piece. That's his art for the winter. He's selling snowballs in snowstorms. That's art too. It's all what your intent is. It's all about intent. And I would say that anything it appears now, and in being on this planet for this long and reading art books and magazines and just seeing stuff that everyone else sees in museums, that art seems to have no limits in what it can cover, you know, and what kind of form it can take. And, you know, in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a thing in the art world going around that actually made sense for a while. And they said, if what you do looks like art, it's not art. And that's when you started getting snowballs for sale, things like that, in a snowstorm. The thing, art, for me, there is a limit to this. And the limit is if it's destructive or it hurts human beings, then it's not art. I don't care how artistic it is, it's not art.
It's a very big question, right? And it's a broad question, and it's a question that I've spent most of my adult life contemplating, really. For me, art is, well, first of all, it's such a huge part of my life as a professional artist. I think that art is a human endeavor. Obviously, other creatures don't make art. But it's more than just the process and skill. It is, I think, the intention, but also something that draws us outside of ourselves, outside of our own separate beings, and connects us to other beings and to nature and what's bigger than us. So I think that's not only what art is, but the function of it, perhaps.
So it's a way we connect with each other. Would you say that?
I think so. I think it is. Art inherently needs a creator and a viewer. So we're just the idea of making it. We're bringing other people in.
Well, that's a pretty hard question. I mean, and students will ask me that, and I'll ask them to turn it back on themselves very often and say, what do you think art is? Right? Because it is in the eye of the beholder, and we all define that within ourselves. I think what art does for us is takes us to a different dimension in thinking and being in the world. So art can take many different forms. Some people may really find a kind of sublime painting by Caspar David Friedrich of clouds on a mountain to be the extraordinary moment. They felt it, they feel it when they stand in front of the painting. Whereas I might really find Hans Hake's cube accumulating moisture to be also a really profound moment, right? So I think that there's that kind of self-experience and what you bring to it and what your own life experience has been. At its best, I think art does open people up to think differently. And we're now at a point in the 21st century that there's been so many modes of art making, and particularly with the conceptualists. And yes, I'm an artist who works with science, but I'm really a research-based, conceptual-based artist. I think of, I work with the ideas as well as the visual form simultaneously, rather than separating the two, right? I'm not in my studio just making pictures for the sake of pictures, but really thinking about thoughts and putting them through a visual format. Right. So it's a little different than maybe some other people's way of making. You know, their self-expression might be really quite different. And who am I to judge that they're not having that significant experience?
This definition brought up many other questions on art. The first was in relation to how money and the business side of it influences art. Is it taking away the meaning and impact that we're supposed to be taking in?
Going off that,
Yeah.
inhibiting creativity, delving into a little more of another topic, which is a role that how money plays. So I've, obviously usually we have illustrators, designers, and they are hired to make these certain, they are hired to make certain things. And
Right.
so how does money influence? Do you think it takes away from creativity, or how do you feel money fits into the art world?
Well, it's interesting. So, again, I'm a non-commercial artist. I make my living as a professor, but I also write a lot of grants, and I've been the beneficiary of many endowments that come from families that are very wealthy. The Mellon, the Ford Family Foundation. Certainly, and that provided me the ability to do research on things that are fairly controversial. So what's amazing about grants and working in that kind of way is that you have a door opened to expose the public to things that they might not think about, know about. There's lots of great art in galleries and commercial realms, in the high art commercial realm, amazing work. Lots of people are able to work that way. I don't hold it against anybody who does. I just went to see a bunch of work while I was in Los Angeles. Went to the Jasper Johns retrospective, and I know that he sold his work all the time. But it didn't stop him from making exactly what he wanted to make and how he wanted to make it, right? I think there are artists that do get stopped up into that vortex because it's a really hard profession. It's really, really hard. It costs a lot of money to make art, and you have to somehow or another stay in the black. You know? So how do you do that? How do you balance the books? You know, and having a teaching job, then you also have to, you have not as many hours, you know. I think that the role of people who are doing things like web design, book design is really amazing. And if they're doing it smartly and really understanding that they are manipulating people's minds, you know, that they're aware of that, doing that in a good way is important. So I also know artists that are friends that work doing design work during the day and paint at night. See, so I think, you know, it really ends up to be how you can pay the bills.
As I got older and had to go into, decide to go into some kind of profession, my dad and I argued about art being not really being a proper profession, and the compromise is that I could go into graphic design, which is like at that time was confused with commercial art. But graphic design is where you actually are doing something for an agreed upon amount of money, which is different from art. Art, you do stuff and then someday someone sees your work and then they buy it in general. That's how it works. So I became very commercial, but it was my same mind at work as when I was in first grade. I'm making objects and I'm making pictures and someone's paying me for it now. And it comes out a little bit different because I have other things to think about. But I'm still doing the same thing. And now I'm retired, I'm not doing graphic design for money, and I sell some paintings. I'm doing the same thing all the way through. And so it's all art, you know. It's and I've been doing it since first grade, and it never stops. It just the emphasis changes, or the types of projects change.
So, did you consider the graphic design you did, like, even though, would you consider that still your art in a sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I still do some graphic design. It's all pro bono work, you know, and I still love it. And if I don't do that, if I do purely painting and drawing, which I love to do, after a while I start missing graphic design. By that I mean not necessarily having a client, although that's part of it, working with someone and trying to get a high quality artistic piece out of something that has to serve somebody else's need. I enjoy that, so I'm trying to solve that problem. Whereas when I'm doing my painting, I just have to solve myself, you know, or satisfy myself.
My last question I had when it came to the definition of art was on controversy. Is it still art if we disagree with it or find it difficult to process?
So you mentioned, it's like, okay, if it's destructive, it's not art, but so is art's job then, would you say that one of art's jobs is to help bring people together? Like, it's not supposed to, like, dividing, are we supposed to be bringing people together with art, you say?
I think that's the ideal the artists should shoot for, somehow. You know, and you know, that can be things that make producing work that make people see in a different way, and maybe more gentle or peaceful or less negative way. You know, has an effect on people when they see the work, or it could be that somehow it's instructive, tells us how to live, points out things like music's good for that. Popular music, pointing out, you listen to a certain kind of music that you like and you realize, I would like to live the way this song is telling me to live. I recognize something in it. And to me, art has got to have, it can be critical, but it's still, in the end, it's got to be humanistic and have some outlet, it can't be airtight. What you're asking is really one of the hardest things to talk about. Maybe I'm getting at hope. You can paint about negative things, Guernica, and still, the fact when you see Guernica and you look at it and it's black and white and all that, and horrible things are happening in it, you're thankful that that painting exists. You're thankful that that painting is saying, look at this horrible thing that happened to these people. Now you'll notice that Guernica is signifying horrible things, but that in itself is a lot easier to take than the actual photograph of the results of that particular transgression on human beings. You know what I'm saying? To see it photographically, see film, like we see every night on television, we see carnage and blood and gore and all that thing all the time. Guernica didn't show it signified those things. It reminded us how horrible it was. In a way, we could sort of calm down and not get so taken up in the blood and the gore of the thing, and see it as a human event, and that this artist documented it in a way that we will not ever forget about Guernica. It'll be in museums. It's kind of an amazing thing that this thing happened.
I mean, there's that controversial art that's going on in the public realm, and there's also, various very visceral, controversial work that is in museums and galleries all the time too, right? Yeah. So it's, I believe in free speech, number one. I wouldn't be making the biometric data work if I didn't believe in that, right? Because I'm trying to expose something nobody really wants to hear. But, many of those cartoons are extraordinarily offensive to people. And we're at a very difficult time at this moment because we've been allowed to be sexist and racist in our society. It was free game for a really long time and nobody was really called on it. And I think now, particularly, we're looking back at either Charlie Hebdo, it's like, hey, wait, should we have that? Where do we draw the line as a society?
Now that the definitions were out of the way, it was time for the bigger question. What does art do for the people? I decided to start out with the artists themselves, not only their perspectives on the art they themselves create, but how they view the art.
Well, my dad was a Stanford guy, and his brother and his father, they're all Stanford people, and they're academics. They couldn't understand me at all because I did rather, B's and C's in school, and those were difficult for me to achieve, and I didn't enjoy it, and I took the art classes that junior high schools and high schools offered, and I always quit after like a month because I couldn't, it was not interesting to me, and I always reverted back to what I've done my whole life. I find a room in a house and I go start making art. And that's what I did through high school. The exception being that I at 15, I got involved in the hot rod world, and I found out that I can paint hot rods, and I can paint flames and scallops on hot rods, and people are actually giving me a little bit of money for it. It's not much money for it, and it's the same. It was the same feeling. Like I would spend like a week or two masking off a car, masking off I would design. I'd mask it off in tape, and then in the last day I would spray the thing. The next day I'd sort of touch it up a little bit, and the thing was out on the street. And I thought, it was just like doing a painting, but it's out in the street. It's on the street. And on a Friday night or a Saturday night, well, the first car I did, we were driving down the main drag, and everyone's showing off their cars at night. And I said, let me out of the car. I was in the car that I had just finished with 3 other guys. I said, let me out of the car, and I want to see what the car looks like on the street. So they dropped me off, and I watched them going up the street twice, up and back a couple times. And I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. I just did a piece of artwork. There it is. It's going right across the street like that. And people are like hanging out their windows and saying, nice, who did that? Stuff like that. And it's sort of like, this is the best. And I had a name. I didn't use my name. I had a name, Manuel, Manwell. And I would always sign the car. And that was the best thing. And I did that. Now, this seems like not much. I did that for only a year and a half. But in teen years, that's a long time. That's the difference between being clean shaven and then all of a sudden having bristles, everything's changing. But I just love that. And graphic design, to me, was sort of like that. It was in the public. It meant that car meant something to those kids on that street. That was the value of it. It didn't solve any problems in the world. What we worried about, if we worried about it all, was the atomic bomb, my generation. Because that we always drilled into it. It could happen anytime, kids. Get under this desk, that might save you from an atomic bomb. But for my generation, we weren't very political. But meaning was important for us. Rock and roll was important. Hot rods are important. That was meaning, and that became unconsciously what I wanted to do.
In your opinion, what do you think is more important? Like how you view your art, or how your viewer, your average person, is going to view your art?
I think it's more valuable how others view my work, because you can't control your work. It's for the world, and it needs to go out into the world, and it's for other people's eyes, and it's a language. And if you've put it together in the way that you feel like you're communicating as best you can, then hopefully they're getting some remnants of what you're communicating. But every time I walk to a piece of work that I've seen before, I interpret it differently too. And I wouldn't want to be told, this is what this work means. It's kind of like, I don't always like those labels next to artwork or the big text panels, because it tells me this is how you need to think about this, right? Yeah. And I wouldn't want to do that to other people either, because that would cut their creative process. I think the viewer is also engaging their own creative mind in looking at art, right? So that's a whole nother way to think about what I'm training people to do, is to become also art viewers. Most of my students won't go off and make art, but they will for the rest of their lives look at art, because it's around us all the time. So I really value training them to think think like an artist when you approach an artwork, right? That, yeah.
Could you go more in depth on how you felt when when not only when you saw the car, but when you see your work in the future, because you did graphic design,
Yeah.
how do you, when you see your work, how does it make you feel?
Kind of the same way as that night down on Main Street. And the feeling is elation, you know, satisfaction. And it's also like, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I did something, it came out of my head and my heart, whatever. I put it down on paper. Someone gave me a little bit of money, I executed it, and the things rolled out, and there it is, and people like it. The right people like it. See, it has to be the right people. The people I want to like it, I want to impress. Because, you know, you can do junk and find people who say, I like that. But you have to know it's good yourself, and then have someone recognize what you're contributing to that person's happiness, but kind of an environmental happiness around that car or that poster or whatever it is, you know? People come in contact with it and they see something, they like it, and it registers, it means something to them. And so, many times people have told me in my design work, I don't know what that means, but I really like it. And I take that as a compliment, because I think, I've always interpreted it as I'm getting to something a little bit deeper inside them. And I'm transferring a little thing that's deep inside me to that person, and they're getting it.
How the artists saw their art really got me thinking. How do we see it? How does everyone else see it? Are we all just individuals seeing this differently, or is there something we're universally taking out of this?
Actually, I want to touch on that point. So you think, so this gets into an effect on the effect your art has on the people around you, not just you. So you think when you put your art out there, you're giving a little bit of yourself to them? Is that...
Oh, absolutely. And it's also nice if you're giving some of yourself to them for people to respond. When people don't respond, this is why artists and designers sometimes are carry a lot of anxiety with them, because maybe people aren't telling them that, or maybe not enough people are telling them that. You know, they need to know it over and over again that they're great. I'm not there, you know, I don't have to be told over and over. It means something to me when people respond to my work, no matter what it is. I know I've done something for them, and it's something for me, and it's important.
So when someone looks at your art, what do you think they are taking in?
Well, I think that, of course, that's different for every individual and every piece of art, but I think that they are pushed to see something maybe differently than they otherwise would. I also think that art, a lot of times it's reflecting our own point of view in some cases, and drawing us out of that in some cases.
So when you're going through a piece and you're putting out this point of view.
Yeah.
And are you saying that point of view, like when you're painting along, does it changes with the piece? You say?
Well, making art's an interesting thing, because I think that it's, first of all, I think it's incredibly complicated. It's taking what we know and taking this intuitive feeling and meshing those together. So when I'm making a piece of art, there isn't always a straight line. My intention, you talked about intention at the beginning, sometimes I have an intention, but the art actually takes me in a different direction. So that's what I love about making art. There's there's all this complexity. It's really super challenging. It's never the same. There isn't one piece of art that I've ever made that's the same as, everything's different.
Now it is time for the big question. What does art contribute to society? Is art just a mere spectacle for us to admire during the day? Or is it more than that? Is it a moral compass for society, like Pablo Picasso's Guernica was? Or is it just a mix in between?
I'm trying to think. Around there's Pioneer Square, they have all those cast bronze animals. There's little beavers, and I think that is a terrific thing. It's Oregon. It's about Oregon. They're beautiful in the street. They're made. They're sculpted well. They're cast well. They're meaningful. They're a surprise thing to see all these wild animals in the downtown area. That's a great piece of public art. It really is, and it reaches across all generations. That piece of art, I think, and so it's popular. It's popular art, and it's not cheesy. And it's well built, and everyone likes it and understands it. And if someone tries to tear that down, there would be a protest movement that would be unbelievable.
Yeah. So that art has such a power that it would move
does.
people to defend
An
it.
appropriateness and a power, and has a spirit about it that transfers to the viewer.
Would you describe, like when we were talking about the Me Too mural, you brought up a point. Would you describe art as certain arts that are more socio-politically motivated as more of a reflection of society at that time, or like a motivation, or maybe a mix of both? What's your opinion on that?
Well, art can have those things and doesn't, and that's fine. It can have none of those things and still be fine. There are things artists do, and you say, you look at it and you say, yeah, that has nothing to do with me, but I just love that thing. It's just beautiful, Or it makes me smile, it makes me laugh. Or 2 weeks later, after I saw it, I'm still thinking about it. There's just something about it. I don't know what it was about it. That's art too. That's really good art. When you just feel it, and you're having a hard time articulating what it is and what you like about it. That's really great art. Does that. That's the best, because it's really deep in here.
One of the questions I want to ask you about was, when it comes to like, what meaning were you putting behind your work? Was it just, in first grade, was it just creating like a nice little image, or was over the time, like what was the process?
Okay.
What was the thought behind your art?
Okay. Well, the beauty about first grade art is you're not thinking about meaning. For my generation in first grade, we probably never even used the word meaning. First graders don't. And the older you get, the more self-conscious you get about what you're doing. And by the time you hit art school, you are overly self-conscious about what you're doing and worried about meaning and value and whether you're letting commercial things drive creative ideas or not. But meaning, again, for graphic design and for art, painting, drawing, meaning is paramount. That's the thing you're always striving for, even if it's abstract painting. In other words, something where there's no figure in it, there's nothing recognizable in it. You're still looking for meaning in that, and it's hard doing that with abstract painting, for instance. But there is meaning in abstract painting, but abstract painting is difficult because there's nothing recognizable in it. So how can there be meaning? That's the way a lot of people feel. But meaning's the most important thing to do if you're a designer or an artist. It's the core of it, to do it well. First of all, this may be my generation speaking, but I don't, I've been out of art school for 24 years, so I don't know. But art does not have to do anything. Art can just be. It can just be. And so that's one end of the scale. And the other end of the scale is art. It's massive. It's global. It goes around. Everyone sees it. Everyone understands it. It can be that. Everywhere in between. The only thing that disqualifies it, back to the art, is if it harms people or creates ill will. Then it's not art. So between those two poles, I could sit in a cabin up in the mountains and just pump out stuff and be happy, and no one sees it, and be happy about that. It's still art, and it's still meaningful. And maybe someday someone will come along and dig that cabin up, and there you go. Why haven't we seen this stuff before? Who is this guy, or woman, or whoever it is? So art does not have, it's sort of the last big free thing, free in terms of freedom, not free in terms of cost, is it can be, it doesn't have to have a use. It doesn't. And that was one of the primary things about the modern art movement is art for art's sake, which was roundly criticized, but it's true. Art can be for art's sake, period. And beyond. It can be we know the whole spectrum it can be. It can be massive. Everyone understands it can be art for art's sake. It should not be limited between those two poles.
Coming into these interviews, I was trying to find a clear and concise answer. What I ended up finding were these broad and open-ended answers. But those are the answers I like the most. Because we can't restrict art. Art can take as many forms as it wants to, even a snowball. Art does not need a purpose. It can have one, but does not need it. Art can just be art. When I set out to answer these questions, I realize now that I was trying to take away the most important part of art, the freedom that comes with it. Art can take any form and it can have any purpose. It is not our job to restrict it. All I ask now is that we respect others and how they view art, because each person is going to take in art differently, and that's what's most important.